Right, well, I'm John-Paul Bayley. Most people call me JP. And I work with Actinio, so I'm Jose's colleague, so you can blame me for his behavior if you want. I'm going to take us through a little journey about a couple of things, have a look at some stuff. I'm going to take you through a little bit of a case study as something that, some work that we did a little while back, which focuses on guide, cinema, coffee, lunch, and of course some Lego. I haven't got any cat slides, I'm sorry about that. Okay, so has anybody seen this statement purveying around the internet, any of that, something like that? Anybody seen that? Yeah? What about this one? It's all post-agile, yeah? So we're kind of getting this stuff, and I got to wondering why that is. So I'd just like you to pair up the person sitting next to you and just take a moment. So what tends to happen in an organization you've been in? You must have experienced this at some point where they've gone agile. So what kinds of things go on? So just 2 minutes, quick conversation about this question, and I'll get some feedback from you. All right, can I get some people to volunteer the kinds of things you were just discussing? McKinsey come in, brilliant. What else happens? Confusion, okay. Okay, so tools, JIRAs, okay, and events, those kinds of things. You say did I hear you say stand-ups? Yeah, okay, great. Okay, so one thing that is, I suppose, being on the other side of that, being often when we get brought into organizations, there's this kind of idea of, let's get agile, or, whatever that means. And typically, the first thing that people want is a project plan of how they're going to become agile, which is a bit of a challenge. Or, worse still, they go straight for some cookie-cutter solution, which is this, let's get off-the-shelf agile, whatever that looks like. And in the most extreme case I've seen of this, I refer to this as the agile sergeant major. Has anybody had this accusation leveled at them? That's not agile, you can't do that, right? Whatever that means. Which is kind of interesting, because we all work in different contexts, and we all learn in different ways. So if you can just take a moment to add up the numbers on this slide, silently in your head. Okay, now, what number did everyone get? 55? Anybody not get 55? Don't be shy. Sometimes people add the 1 and the 0. It's not a trick question, so they don't do it as 10. So, all right, put your hand up if you added these up by going 1 plus 2 plus 3 all the way up to 10? Did anybody do it like that? So got a few people doing that. Did anybody do 10 plus 9 plus 8 down to 1? Okay, right. Did anybody do some form of grouping? There's a few people done grouping. So does anyone in here grouped it in 10s, like 1 plus 9, 2 plus 8? Anybody do 11s? Okay. Anybody do it a way I haven't covered? There's got to be someone. How do you do it? Okay. Brilliant. So this is just addition, right? It's quite a simple thing, but we've all done it in loads and loads of different ways. And this is indicative of a few things. The key one to me really is that the brain is a really, really powerful organ, and it looks for shortcuts. It finds patterns, and it repeats those patterns over and over again. And the challenge is when we are brought a cookie-cutter solution, we're shortcutting our learning, and we're stopping ourselves from being able to use various different, use our brains, basically. It's kind of like the thinking's been done for us. So Liz just mentioned autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Has anybody read Dan Pink's book, or at least seen the YouTube video and know what we're kind of talking about here? If you haven't, go and check it out. It's great. This is from a book called Informal Learning by Jay Cross, and I think it speaks to that really. It's having this freedom to develop mastery, and it's a really, really important key thing when we start off working in companies and you know, on this becoming agile journey. And I think it ties in very, very well with this. So we talked about, you know, what's the first thing that happens? Well, lady over there mentioned that it was, you know, we get JIRA and, you know, meetings and stuff get foisted upon us. Well, okay, so there might be some interaction involving in the meeting, but it's the process and tool that tends to come first rather than the individual and the interaction that happens there. And also, you know, when we've got this project plan, there's this idea that we've got this idealized state of B. Jose asked everyone the question earlier, you know, why do companies go agile? And we had things like faster, cheaper, more predictable, those kinds of things. And that's what we aspire to, these kinds of outcomes. But often there isn't like this sort of straight journey between there. It's change, and it's a messy business. You can't kind of plot the path on that. And maybe you end up at destination C, and maybe that's okay. So this is more about responding to change rather than following a plan. I mean, it's a hard thing when people are actually trying to buy something if they can't really put their hands on it. It's much easier if they can kind of go, right, well, you know, if people are behaving in this particular way by month 2, then we know we've got progress, whatever that ends up looking like. But the problem is that involves changing the way that large groups of people behave. If one person is actually quite difficult to deal with, I know certainly when I became a development manager, having been a developer for years and mining Google and mining Stack Overflow to try and figure out why my code wasn't working, I could hardly go and Google, why is Bob upset with me? And somehow get an answer that's going to help. It's not that straightforward. So groups of people, you know, it's really, really messy business that we're talking about dealing with. So if you're the person who's maybe sponsoring this, the work that we're doing, you want the comfort of having some expertise. There's this kind of addiction to experts that we have. But the problem with that is that we do become addicted to these experts. John and Helen were talking about that earlier, you know, what happens when the coaches leave, but I'll touch a little bit on that in a moment. So flipping out the other way, if you're one of the people who is coming into an organization to help them, this is a bit of a dilemma, because really, you know that the first thing you've got to do is take a breath, have a look at what's going on, start to understand the context, and then, you know, start to sort of tip things in the right direction, hopefully. But there is also this either explicit or implicit expectation on us that we've got to make a splash. You know, you turn up on day one and somehow have got to make an impact, when actually that could be the worst thing to do, because at that point, you've got experience from other companies. It doesn't necessarily follow that it's going to fit and work really well in that company. So you've got to take your time on these and take a little breath. If we make a splash, we can be overly prescriptive. You know, we're not in the world of if this, then that, when we're dealing with large groups of people and teams and so forth. And we also run the risk of our biases taking over and, you know, seeing patterns which aren't there because they're just things that we think match. You know, there's this, being able to come with a beginner's mind is fantastic. And that's one of the powers of asking people for their own solutions, because they already know the answer. It's just down to us to help surface that with them. The opposite extreme of this, though, is this. It's a blank canvas. Has anybody been in a company where people have just descended and gone, right, from now on, you're self-organizing. See you later. I mean, whatever that looks like. You know, it's like being given a ream of paper and being told to write a book. I mean, you know, on what? Is it fiction? Is it non-fiction? So I'm going to show you a few things. I've got a little caveat, though. And I think this is the second most popular slide to the cat slides. It depends. So I'm going to show you a few experiments we tried. I'll talk a little bit about them, why we did them. And if you want to try some of them, go right ahead, be my guest. I'd love to hear how they got on. But also bear in mind, they might work, they might not work. So just with that caveat in mind, don't copy everything that we're doing literally, but there's some suggestions here which I hope you will find useful. So we were talking about faster, quicker delivery, more predictable. I'm going to show you some work we did with a company based over in Ireland. They were writing a lot of software originally. I'm not going to go like miles into depth with the context of it, but we were brought in to work with the product and tech teams originally. They were having some troubles getting stuff out in time. The product function was finding it very difficult to understand how much work they would get out over time, so they needed some help. And so they called us in. So we understood a little bit about what the project sponsors wanted from this, but we also wanted to know what was in it for the people who this was happening to. So one of our first steps was to utilize a technique which is, has anybody read the book or seen the book Gamestorming? Yeah? It's a great little book by Sonny Brown, James McAdoo, and Dave Gray. Not necessarily in that order. And it's got loads and loads of really cool facilitation techniques for which you can use. This is one of them. It's a cover story, which is what this is called. You're asking people to imagine like an idealized future. It allows them to kind of get past their blockers because they're basically putting their mind into the future based on the idea that the company they're in or the team they're in has somehow ended up on the cover of a magazine. You're not telling them why, they've just ended up there. And we end up with stuff that looks a little bit like this. Oops, gone one too far. So we have over here the cover, then the headlines. This starts to put meat on the story. We have like these little sidebars which give interesting little nuggets of how they got there. They end up drawing some images on there, and then quotes about what people are saying. It might be people in the company, it could be famous people, it could be all sorts. Now the key thing here is they then present that back and they're sharing that information and you're actually gathering the information. So the artifact is really a catalyst, but it's still a nice thing to kind of have around the place when people are in tough times. They can have a look at the poster and remember why they're doing this thing. So that's kind of getting the why, helping the why out from people. Another thing we tried was Lego Serious Play. Has anybody been subjected to a Lego Serious Play session or run Lego Serious Play? So let's just try a quick experiment. So we talk a lot of times about Agile values, and one that surfaces quite a lot is respect. So pair up with the person next to you and give each other a definition of what respect is, please. Did you say exactly the same thing to each other? So we've got a lot of these really quite abstract concepts like this. We talk about courage, we talk about respect, focus, collaboration. There's all these words that we throw around saying you need these values to be agile, right? It's a really, really important thing. So the really great thing about Lego Serious Play, to those of you who haven't done it, it allows you to build out metaphors and build shared stories. So we can see over on the far side here these two smaller pictures. These are people building out Kanban values and then discussing them in the teams. So at least they then know where they're coming from when they start talking about balance and transparency and all these different bits and pieces. This one on the left here is a personal favorite of mine. Towards the end of the session that we did with them, we asked them, well, what's the main thing that's blocking you from success right now? Build the nature of that. So this person had they put this Lego person in there. Everyone had exactly the same pieces, by the way. But they built this put this Lego person on a little plate and then built a wall of greenness. And the person was just standing like this. When they related their story, it turns out that they were just basically blocked by having way too much work. They could not get anything done because it's just constant, like fire hose of work. So that was the wall. So he said, okay, so what one thing is going to change that for you? Change your model to show that. So they grabbed this flagpole and knocked the wall down. So he said, oh, that's great, what's that? He said, oh, well, that's the hammer of Kanban, smashing the work out of the way. So that's a good one. But it's a really, really great way of getting people to talk about the abstract and make it concrete. One thing we were really conscious of was making sure that we went very wide in the organization. So Jose was talking about like kind of getting the agility to go all the way across. And it's a challenge because oftentimes people go, well, techies doing whiteboards and post-it note stuff, that's not for us. But also very deep. We want people to have a deep knowledge so they're able to kind of use utilize the knowledge and the skills they have for their own context, and then high, which means basically getting C-level engagement wherever possible. And to reiterate, well, Carl was talking about this on Twitter, but also Klaus Leopold, you know, agility is a corporate sport. It's not just about the teams. So he came up with this idea of 50 videos in 50 days, also known as the business agility cinema. And I can show you here. If we look in the background over here, we can see that there is there's a coffee bar. So every morning, if you got into work before 9 a.m., you got a free coffee. So we kind of spotted this and realized, because there's this whacking great big television screen here, that if we started playing videos around 5 to 9 about Agile and stuff, that we'd start just sort of spreading the message, because it's not all techies that were turning up for that. There were HR people, customer care people, finance people turning up for their free coffee. So we popped this on, and every day for 50 days, we played a different video. And they ranged it from like a minute or so up to like 15 minutes. So here's an old one. I think Dave, when he saw this on Twitter, was saying that there's a much newer, much better version of this. This is quite an old picture. But this is the backwards brain bicycle. I don't know if anybody's ever seen that one, where basically some engineers have wired a bicycle backwards so that when you pedal it and you try to steer one direction, it steers the other way. And yeah, it's a good one. You can go and look it up. So that's all well and good. Actually, if you want to go and check this out, we've started publishing these videos in a blog. We've not been that great at doing it very quickly, but we are getting there. If you go and have a look at that URL, they're all there. You can. There's also a QR code that will take you there if you want it. So how do you spread this stuff in the organization once you're there? So I took a leaf out of Jason Little's Lean Change Management book. I don't know if is anybody familiar with Jason Little's work? So he had this story of working in a large government organization in Canada, and he basically put posters up by the elevators saying, come and have coffee and talk about Agile. And they did lean coffee meetings around this. So we decided to do something similar. We actually did an elevator pitch in one of the elevators here and like put that on as an advert before one of the things, before one of the videos to do this as well. And well, the first time we did it, we ended up having to have 2 boards because we just couldn't get enough people around one board to do the conversation. So we ran these every 2 weeks, and we'd use the videos that we've been doing to help people, well, to kind of seed the conversation and you know, generate a discussion. And I think the second one we had the Chief Operating Officer turn up to. The third one, the Chairman turned up to. So, you know, it was working. We were getting quite high in the organization with dealing with this, and that was great. And I believe they still do lean coffees, at least monthly now, just to generally talk about things that are in the company. So it's something that's really, really stuck with them. And community engagement is a really important thing. I know any meetup arrangers in here, being given a venue is like gold dust. And it's a great thing to be able to bring external voices into the company, but also to give the internal voices a channel to express themselves. So here we can see that we've used this rather splendid venue they've got with the big screen there. This is Ministry of Testing in Dublin, came in and did some talks. One of the test automation engineers had an opportunity to do a talk. He'd never done it before, so this was kind of quite a safe environment for him to do it in. But it's also a great way of saying, look, this is a really cool place to come and work. Join us as well. So when they start looking for people, they've got that reputation there. We also did some internal engagement as well by running lunch and learn sessions. So we're using feature ban. There was one session that we ran where we had 2 marketing teams and the finance team playing feature ban, which is great because we've got them to come up with their own work and post-it notes for learning about how to manage their knowledge work through WIP. So how do we carry on when the coaches have gone? We like to think about this as we need to make ourselves redundant as quickly as possible, but in the best possible way. So redundant for the right reasons, not redundant for the wrong reasons. So some of you may have seen on one of the tables out there this little thing. So we were working with some So Jose and I were working with another colleague, Andy DeVale, and 3 of us collaborated on building this. You can't see it so well because of the contrast, but there's like green ones and yellow ones here. We've got the Kanban practices across the top. The green ones are ones we're kind of indicating this is where most people sort of start, and the yellow ones are, you might want to try this later, but bearing this in mind, it's by no means a thing that's here that's meant to, you're meant to judge yourself by others by. It's not a measurement tool. It's there as a tool to prompt conversations and figure out what to do next. So concretely, what did that look like? Well, the team started working with them. They had color-coded Post-it notes. So the green ones were, we've adopted this and it's working for us. The yellow ones were, this is stuff that we're experimenting with. And if they had a red one on there, it was something that they discarded. They tried it, it hadn't worked out for them, maybe they used to do it. We can't see any on here because this is quite early in the process. One thing I can tell is that there's a lot of yellow on here. Again, the contrast is not great, but perhaps they're maybe doing too much experimentation. So it's worth having that conversation and reflecting that back. So that's all well and good because it means that as coaches, we can get pulled in to help with these things if they need to. They can say, right, we'd really like to try measuring our flow efficiency. How do we go about doing that? But that doesn't help when we've gone. So you notice this guide in the background. Well, we got them to do a load of lightning talks. From the people who've been turning up to the Lean Coffee, from the people who turned up to the Lunch and Learn, we found the people who were really keen to learn a lot more about this, so we recruited them. And in doing so, and it was like completely cross-functional across the entire company, we got people to volunteer to run little lightning talks on each of these things. They built their own internal expertise. So when we weren't there, like after we'd gone, there were people who could explain this stuff to them. And another thing that we tend to find is that, we have to be pretty good facilitators as Agile coaches, but then when that facilitation expertise has left the building, you then go back to the same old dull meetings. I mentioned Gamestorming earlier. It's a great book for this stuff. These are product boxes from, this come from Luke Homan's Innovation Games, and this is about customer collaboration. So this is a training course we ran, and we got them to build the radio of the future. So they basically spend some time building this radio, they designed the box the radio might come in. So they don't actually have to design the radio, and then they pitch it back to the room, and you kind of discover the customer needs from that. And then it's really important you can carry on the learning after you've gone. So we identified within the organization who the most likely kind of coach candidates would be, using things like training from the back of the room, learning 3.0, so we were using things like learning shots, learning canvases, and learning mosaics so that people kind of had a way to concretely carry on learning. We built this capability for them to carry on. So what, you might say? Well, apart from all the Kanban training and stuff that we did that gave them metrics, gave them some predictability, we know from having been there repeatedly, they still, things are still moving. Things have changed. It's not stayed still. We get over to Dublin a couple of times a year, and we usually pop in and say hi. Coffee's great there. And we are able to, just check in and see how they're doing. And it seems to have stuck quite some time afterwards, so we were really, really pleased about that. So, a few experiments here to try. Don't try them all at once, but if there is something on there that you particularly like the sound of, I'll be around for the rest of the day. I can talk to you a little bit more about it. Otherwise, ping me a message on Twitter and I can elaborate if you would like to know some more. But here are some experiments you could try, and maybe some of them will work for you. I'd be really interested to hear whether that is the case. So, thank you very much.